16, where you've
There it
actually got
is.
blue in a yellow
Keep
area.
going.
Let's see the
I'm
percentage
tired.
now. And this is the kind of thing the winning side needs to do, is to paint the opposing area blue or yellow. 52% for Leave and 48% for Remain. So that's very good for Leave. They're winning in a place where Remain were expected to win. But a different result from Lambeth, and I want to show you this now. If we go to the most Remain end, we've got a lot of London and Scotland actually on the Remain end for all the reasons discussed. London and Scotland will be likely the highest votes for Remain. Lambeth is right there. An awful lot of voters in Lambeth. Look at the length of the bar. But also look at the proportion of yellow on that bar. That is the margin of the Remain win. Now this result from Lambeth is pretty much the first really good piece of good news for Remain tonight, because 79% is beyond what was expected even with them on that far end of the bar. 79% Remain, 21% Leave. If Remain are going to pull this back, they're going to do it through building up majorities like that in dense urban centres. So Lambeth, suddenly, Remain have a moment with Lambeth where they think, if that happens all over London, there are an awful lot of votes coming their way.
We've just had Wandsworth in, Jeremy, as you speak, so in southwest London, including Tooting, where Sadiq Khan, the new mayor of London, came from. There are the raw figures: 118,000 for Remain, 39,000 for Leave, 25% for Leave, 75% for Remain. I don't know whether, John Curtis, that is good news for Remain, whether they expected to do better in both Lambeth and Wandsworth.
Those are both good results for Remain. They're about some 10 points above what we're expecting. So it's beginning to look as though London will indeed, even though we were expecting Remain to do well, may well do even better there. Contrarily, however, some of the first results from the northwest, places like St Helens, we are seeing the Remain side being well adrift. So it may be, we were long talking about in this referendum campaign about the potential difference between Scotland and England. We may also be talking about a major difference between London and the rest of England. And that at the end of the day, if indeed the United Kingdom does vote to leave, and we're not saying that's what's going to happen yet by any means, but if it does, it will be provincial England that will have determined the UK's fate.
You were talking earlier about turnout in London. Has turnout in London affected these raw figures? Has it had the effect you thought, or were the turnout figures accurate?
Well, I mean, what does seem to be true is that the increase in turnout in London above what we got in last year's general election seems to be somewhat less than it is in most other parts of the UK. It's rising by about 4 points or so in London. It's 6 points across the country as a whole. We should say, by the way, we've not really said this so far. I mean, at the beginning of the night we were talking about very high turnouts. Well, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But it does look as though we've got something like a 72% turnout for this referendum, which will be the first time since 1997 in a UK-wide vote that we've got more of a 70% turnout. So the truth is, whoever does win this referendum, we still don't know who it's going to be, and those London results have added to the uncertainty. It will be very difficult to argue that they don't have a mandate and that the country has not made a clear decision. Voters have been engaged by this referendum in a way that, frankly, recent general elections have rather failed to interest them.
And of course the percentage is not a reflection of the actual numbers, because there have been a lot of people who put their names on the register to vote who weren't there before.
Indeed, so the
fact that this campaign.
Indeed, so the fact that we've got 72% of the vote, even though about 1.7 million added their names to the register since last December, is an indication of, as it were, an even greater democratic success than it otherwise would be.
We've had a leave from London, Barking and Dagenham, in East London, and 46,000, 27,000, 62%, 38%.
That isn't surprising, David, but actually here now we get out of, as it were, the inner metropolitan core of London to an area where historically the core of London, where there are a lot of young, mobile people, lots of them living in the city, etc., etc. Once we get outer towards London, which is rather more like the rest of England, maybe Remain will be struggling rather more.
And just a reminder over the UK as a whole, at the moment, the Leave side is running at 49.3%, and Remain 50.7. I mean, we keep showing these figures of percentages from counting areas. Remember, it doesn't actually amount to a row of beans. What matters is the raw numbers. And Leave is on 2,393,000 at the moment, and Remain on 2,462,000. That's what we have to look at. Here we are at Broadcasting House, BH as it's lovingly called, saying it's too early to call, but have a look at the figures projecting there on the front. The yellow for Remain at 50.7 and Leave at 49.3. And I think it still has to do something for us. Oh, it doesn't. I thought it emerged in some strange way. Anyway, there we are. There is Broadcasting House on the left and the new Broadcasting House on the right, all bright blue where the piazza is, added recently to the old building. Well, it's just after 2:30. We ought to get some news now, so let's have the news right now. Here's Rita Chakrabarti again. Rita.
Thank you, David. There's a mixed picture emerging from the first results of Britain's referendum on its future in the EU. With only a small fraction of voting areas having declared, the outcome is simply too close to call. A final result will not be known for several hours. Here's our political correspondent Eleanor Garnier, and her report contains some flash photography.
It was the moment polling stations closed. The UK had given its verdict. And the first result to declare Gibraltar with a decisive 96% vote in favour of Remain. Not long after, Newcastle with a narrow win for Remain.
65,404.
A much smaller win than expected. But in Sunderland, a huge win for Leave with 61%.
Votes cast in favour of Leave.
Away from the north of England in Basildon in Essex, another big win for Leave. And another count with a big turnout at 74%. At a Leave campaign party in London earlier in the night, the UKIP leader remained defensive.
We don't lose this battle tonight. We will win this war. We will get our country back. We will get our independence back. And we will get our borders back. Thank you.
It's very narrow, this.
It was a bruising campaign, and some say whether it's Leave or Remain, politicians need to do more to listen to the country.
Whatever the result of this, there'll be lessons that have to be learned by the Labour Party, but not just on the issue of immigration, a whole wider set of things for the Labour Party, but also for the government, you know, about what people are saying about the state of the country.
It's looking increasingly like turnout will be above 70% for the first time in a UK-wide contest since 1997. As results continue to come in, remember the referendum isn't decided count by count, but vote by vote. Eleanor Garnier, BBC News.
Well, following the first results, the pound fell dramatically, although it's regained some of those losses in the last hour. When the New York Stock Exchange closed, the pound was trading at just under $1.49. It fell at one point to $1.43, but has since recovered slightly. One currency analyst said traders are very jittery. The Italian Coast Guard said it rescued around
Do you not worry about that discontent in the future? You think things will come together all right after this vote?
I think any discontent will manifest themselves within the EU.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys. Well, they've taken it seriously here.
on their arms following 3 years of negotiations. More than 200,000 people were killed during the conflict. Storms and heavy rain have caused serious flooding in parts of London and in southeast England. Several commuter and underground lines in the capital suffered severe delays and cancellations during the rush hour. Commuters suffered further chaos as they tried to get home in the evening. The UK's population grew by 500,000 last year. New figures show it's now just over 65 million. The Office for National Statistics says the increase is in line with the average population growth. Well, that's it. More from me soon.
Good. Well, welcome back to our coverage here of a very fascinating, complex, difficult to predict race on the referendum on Leave and Remain. The figures you saw a moment ago, 2.6 million for Leave, 2.7 million for Remain, but it absolutely means nothing at this stage because we've so much more to come in. We've only had 74 out of 382 counting areas in. We've got a number of things to talk about, what's happening in Wales, various other things, and what's happening in the Labour Party with John McDonnell. Let's just join Emily first.
David, thank you. I'm joined by Andrew Rawnsley and Isabel Hardman for the Observer and the Spectator. I've got to pull your eyes away from what's going on Channel 4 at the moment, some sort of Swedish porno.
No, I was watching the markets, I promise you. I was watching the market.
Thank goodness for that. You've put me at rest. This is tantalisingly close at the moment. What do you think is going on in Downing Street as well?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of panic in Downing Street, and I suspect there's also quite a lot of panic in a lot of Labour constituencies in the north, as well as they see their voters who they thought they were in step with turning away from them and voting out.
It's been very engaging, though. The weird thing about this is if turn-up is high, if the race is very close, it hasn't put people off.
Well, you remember a lot of people at the beginning of the campaign were saying, ooh, how much do people really care? Most people about Europe, we know a minority of people care about it very passionately, but do they care that much? Well, at a lot of predictions, I remember turnout being very much lower than at a general election. Well, one thing, as you say, Emily, we don't know where we're going to be at 6 o'clock in the morning, but one thing we know is turnout's going to be higher than at a general election. And a lot of voters have obviously thought this is a very, very important moment, whatever the result, very important moment in our country's history, and I'm going to go and perform my civic duty.
I heard John McDonnell was speaking a few minutes ago about the sense of a by-election, as if this was about austerity, as if this was about grievances, as if it wasn't about Europe. Do we not trust the voter to actually make this about Europe? What's your sense?
Well, I think most of the sort of public meetings that I've gone to and most of the people I've spoken to seem to be very engaged with the issues, even if it's the issues that Labour politicians like John McDonnell wouldn't like them to be engaged with, such as immigration. Actually, people aren't trying to stick two fingers up to the government. They're actually trying to send maybe the elites a message about immigration and issues like that, but it is about the European Union, not about the UK government.
I would agree with this, but although you could say it is a by-election about the establishment, or the elites, as the out-campers tend to call them. Because whatever happens tonight, even if Remain should edge it, about a half of the country will have listened to every major party leader except Nigel Farage, about 3/4 of the MPs in the House of Commons, and every professional body you can think of, from scientists to doctors to people in the arts world, who've always been advising them to vote in, and about half the country will have voted out.
And that half of the country, where it is quite important. If, as is expected, London and Scotland are carrying the Remain vote, what does that tell you about the divide?
Well, and if their votes end up leading to an overall Remain vote, that will cause huge resentment in other parts of the UK, that there's a sort of Planet London, and there's already resentment between certain parts of the UK and Scotland, that actually the UK is already quite divided, and this will really add to that sense of grievance.
Although that would be true if it goes the other way, remember. I mean, Scots, who are clearly going to, most of them to vote to stay, will be resentful, and it may lead in due course to another referendum on independence. We know, I think we're pretty clear, a lot of London is going to be majority in. London would have as much right probably to be resentful back towards England if the rest of England had forced us out, saying, well, you're cutting our throats and you're cutting your own, actually. So it could go both ways, that resentment.
How many party leaders do you think will have left their job by the end of this week?
You go first.
I think the Conservatives have tried very hard to make it clear that Cameron will stay on to steer the course if there is a Leave vote, but he will have to set out a clear timetable for his departure. I do detect serious movings against Corbyn, though.
I'd say maximum one. I don't think Jeremy Corbyn will be disappearing this week. If any party leader might be disappearing, or at least having to say, I'm going in due course, it will be David Cameron.
Thank you both very much indeed, David.
Just a reminder of how things are going. The northeast, for instance, there's the percentage, 50%, 41%, 59%. 59 for Leave, 41 for Remain. And but nice to have the percentages for, let's just go on a bit, northwest. I'm mentioning the northeast, the northwest, 59%, 41% Remain. London so far, let's leave the raw figures and just see the percentage if we can. 31% Leave, it's running at 69% Remain. We've had Hammersmith and Fulham in. Hammersmith and Fulham, 70% for Remain and 30% for Leave. Now we're joined by somebody who was Secretary of State for Wales until very recently, in fact until Ian Duncan Smith walked out of Cabinet, and he became Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Stephen Crabb. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Crabb. Is Wales proving a bit of a disappointment to the Remain campaign?
Well, I mean, it is early days, and we'll see what the rest of the night holds for us, but I'm not in any way surprised by these early results that we've seen for Wales. I felt for a number of years that the politics of Wales were being reshaped quite profoundly, and what you're seeing in the South Wales valleys and also in some of the North Wales Labour seats is the same phenomenon you're seeing in the northeast of England and in some of the other old industrial white working class areas of England. A large number of voters saying, sorry, we just don't believe the Labour Party or the government in the way they tell us that Europe and the European Union is good for us. And I think that's going to be one of the strong themes of tonight, is the way that the white working class Britain, certainly England and Wales, just haven't trusted the messages that we've been trying very hard to communicate about why staying part of the single market is so important for their jobs and for manufacturing and for revitalising these old industrial areas.
If at the end of the night we turn out to have a Brexit vote, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has said there's going to be an emergency budget. David Cameron said he's going to carry on with getting out of the EU. Do you think that both those things will happen? Will there be an emergency budget, or was that just a threat? And one of the things that may have put people off voting for Remain.
I think it's far too early to speculate what the outcome of the vote tonight will be. Other than that, we just know it's going to be very, very close. And clearly there's some quite deep divisions within the country in terms of the voting patterns. I spent most of today outside of London, actually in Wales, and when I arrived in London this evening, I'm afraid I didn't share the same buoyant feeling that some of my Remain colleagues did, who had spent the day in London campaigning, were reporting a very strong and positive message for Remain. So we've got to listen to what the messages are that are coming through from this referendum, but it's too early to speculate on what the outcomes and implications will be in terms of government actions to respond to what the scenario will look like tomorrow and the day after. But in terms of the leadership, I think it's absolutely essential that David Cameron stays on as Prime Minister. He has a clear mandate to be Prime Minister and to lead a government that provides stable governance for the country, and I think it's essential that he does that.
What about your failure to persuade Tory supporters in Wales to vote Remain?
Yeah, that's part of the similar picture. Don't forget, Wales is one of those parts of the UK that probably gets more European money than elsewhere, where a number of large manufacturers have located their plants and provided jobs, partly on the back of the European single market and certainly European assistance. But clearly people up and down Wales haven't recognised the benefit of that for their own individual lives, and there isn't any kind of emotional attachment from the people of Wales towards the European Union. And we'll spend the coming weeks and months asking questions about why that is, but clearly politics in Wales has shifted. It looks a lot more like politics of the rest of England outside London rather than the politics of Scotland, which people were comparing it to just a few years ago.
Well, thank you very much for that. John McDonnell, you're listening to that. I want to ask you a question about Labour. And Andy Burnham, who was a candidate for the leadership, has said the message to Labour from voters for Leave was, it should be, we've heard you, we understand what you're saying, we've got to change. Do you agree with that?
Yes, we've got to listen to our own.
Well, why haven't you been listening?
Well, we have been. I think.
Well, hang on. You can't say we've got to listen.
But they're telling it that we have been listening, but clearly people don't think we've listened enough, and we haven't come back on those issues that they've confronted us.
So how would you come back on immigration?
I think what we have to do now is look at free movement of labour. We've been saying this through the campaign, but I don't think that message has got across. The issues that are on the doorstep with regard to immigration is the feelings that people are having their wages undercut, that there's pressure on public services, and there's a deep feeling of insecurity. Now,
so what would you propose?
Well, in terms of free movement of labour, we've been arguing, and I don't think we've got the message across effectively, that we need to protect people from having their wages undercut. That means more employment rights. It means changes in some of the European Union directives, posted worker directive, for example. It does mean preventing agencies just recruiting outside of the UK, particularly types of workers. So that sort of, I think, employment rights approach is one that could be protected. In terms of pressure on public services, we've said time and time again that the government was wrong to scrap the migration fund that was assisting areas where it came under particular pressure. And it does reflect, though, the austerity measures that the government have introduced. And a lot of the grievances that have come up with regard to immigration, I have to say, are a reflection of what's happened in terms of austerity under this government. It is this government that's been cutting the NHS. It's this government that hasn't provided enough school places. So I think there's a whole debate to be had now, and we've got to say, yes, we are listening to what people are telling us.
It'll be a bit late because you'll be out of the EU anyway, so all these things you're talking about, the posted workers directive and all the rest of it, will be irrelevant.
Whatever happens to the decision today, we have to have a new relationship with the European Union. Whether we're in or out, that relationship has to be negotiated. And some of these issues will be on the table.
John Mann, the Labour MP, is just joining us from Westminster in favour of leaving the EU. John, what would you say to Mr McDonnell about the way Labour handled this campaign?
Well, Labour was somewhat out of touch. And I'm surprised, David, you're not calling it for a Leave victory, because every single result that's come through was predictable. In the coal fields, where there are no results out yet, I predict it's going to be 2-1 for Leave. In my constituency, turnout was up 10% on the general election. And if you look at, even in Scotland, Dundee, the Scottish heartland for the SNP, every party in the Scottish Parliament voting for Remain, 40% voted to leave. Wales is going to vote a majority Leave. Northern Ireland's going to vote a majority for Leave. It leaves London, but if we take that Dagenham result, even in London, there's huge disparity. And Labour voters have decisively voted to leave the European Union.
Where have Labour got it wrong then? I mean, let's not go into speculating whether, you know, you're right about all those places, Northern Ireland and the rest of it, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. But where has Labour gone wrong?
Well, Labour's gone wrong by not being in touch with its voters. I've been saying this for the last 10 years in relation to immigration and free movement of labour. I've been saying it in relation to what the offer is to working class people. It's not something new in this campaign. I'm not the only one, but it's a small number who've been saying it at the national level in Labour. I've said it for the last 10 years repeatedly.
And
what we're offering working class people is 0-hour contracts. What the country's offering, 0-hour contracts, agency work, insecurity, and people are sick to death of it. They've had enough. And that's why, in my area and elsewhere, Labour voters have voted in huge numbers to leave the European Union.
John McDonnell, do you think he's right in this critique of Labour?
I think John's right on a number of the policy issues, but on 0-hours contracts, we've already said we're going to scrap them altogether. In terms of insecurity at work, we've said we'll tackle the issue of the undermining of trade union rights in this country, and that means opposing the government's Trade Union Act. In addition to that, in terms of security, we want to have the workforce more involved in the planning of their company, represented on their company boards. So all of those issues that John has raised, we've actually got policies to deal with them. The issue for us now is how do we get those policies across. What's interesting is if you look at the shape of the vote tonight, is those areas that are not gaining in any way from the supposed recovery in the economy and have suffered economically over the last decade. that are voting for leave. And I think that is, yes, it's a reflection of what they think about the European Union not assisting them, but I also think it's a reflection of a condemnation of the government's policies over the last 7 years when it comes to austerity. There's real grievances out there which we think we've got the policies to address, and we need to get those across.
Theresa Villas, as a Brexiter, do you think he's right that that's what you're winning, if you are winning, because of the failings of the Conservative government?
No, I think that the people who voted leave did so with a real understanding of the issues, that at the moment, as a member of the European Union, we do not govern our own affairs. It doesn't matter who you vote for at a devolved or a general election. There are many things that you cannot change, including free movement and immigration rules, and that's not healthy for our democracy.
So it's a constitutional matter for people, not what John is saying, and John is saying that people feel that they've been left behind and that they've had no static wages for a long time, uncertainty about their jobs and all the rest of it.
People feel a lack of control overall. They feel not represented by the political elite, as they describe it, but they don't feel represented in Europe either. So they feel a lack of control over those very bread and butter issues about whether they can get a decent job, decent wages, roof over their heads, and decent education for their children.
I think that when we've been talking to hundreds of voters in the last couple of months around the country, for lots of people, it's been a whole mixture of things, but people have really thought about these issues. They have engaged in it. They have thought about the European Union. It's been about identity. And of course, that is a complex thing. So whenever we're going to hear politicians say all sorts of things over the coming days, voters have thought deeply about this, many of them. You can't just dismiss it and say it's one thing here or it's one reason. There's a whole conglomeration of reasons.
All right.
Many of them are about the European Union. It can't be dismissed just as something else.
We've got Liverpool in. Let's see the Liverpool figures. 85,000 leave and 118,000 remain. A much lower turnout, 64%, than we were getting from some other parts of the country. 42% leave, 58% remain. There we are. And the United Kingdom as a whole at the moment, it was there, but it's gone. Can we have that? Yes, there we are. This is how things are looking at the moment. Pretty well even. 3.7 million either side. 49.8, 50.2. We've had 103 of 382 of our counting areas in. Islington has just come in. Jeremy Corbyn's part of the world. 25,000 leave, 76,000 remain. 25 and 75%. So, John Mann, thank you very much for joining us. Let's go to you, Jeremy, and what have you got for us?
Well, I think we'll just collate some of the results and have a look at the map here. It's the time where we've got enough results that we can actually show you the map of the UK, and it's worth just taking in what the pattern is here. So here we see where Remain have come first in a counting area, they get yellow. Where Leave have come first, they get their area coloured blue. And you see the immediate story here, a lot of yellow in Scotland. So if it does go at the end of the night to Remain, Scotland going powerfully for Remain, and London as well, will be the reasons. But of course, too early to talk like that, and it may well be going the other way. I can show you a heat map which just displays how powerful the support for Leave is. Now, on this map, to explain, where it is dark blue, Leave have had more votes. Where it is light blue, they've got much softer support. So you see immediately Scotland, that situation underlying, where Leave is not really getting anything like the numbers it's getting elsewhere. And London as well. Can you see just down here in the southeast how light it is? Just here in the central London, those results we've had so far. But head out towards Essex, and suddenly the blues get darker here. And actually look at the whole of the map, and just look at the amount of dark blue there is in the north, particularly the north of England, the northeast. That's how we started the night, with some remarkable results from the northeast. So Leave is packing a powerful punch in lots of places outside London and Scotland. But maybe London and Scotland will pull it back for Remain. Now this is our proportional map, and what we show you here is each counting area as a stalk, and the stalk is coloured in the colour of the side that won. And the crucial thing is this: the height of the stalk shows you the winning margin. So for example, here in Scotland, that's Glasgow, the highest stalk. You can see that Remain won there by a very large margin. But also, if you look down south, just reminds you of the sheer volume of votes available in London. That's Lambeth, that very tall one, and other results we've had from London, where Remain is winning with powerful results. But elsewhere, just come in close if you can for a moment and have a look at this map, this proportional map. You're seeing so many of these blue stalks. There are so many places where Leave is winning outside London and Scotland, and actually the margins of those Leave victories are really very powerful. So yes, there may not be as many voters outside London, but my goodness, the margins for Leave are making it very difficult for Remain to make up the ground. David.
Thanks, Jeremy. Castle Point we have in Essex, the main Canvey Island. I think one of the largest proportion of predominantly English speaking, white English speaking people in the UK, and expected to go very much for Leave, and this is what Castle Point did. 37,000, 73% Leave, 27% Remain. Andrew Sinclair is in Chelmsford, political correspondent for the East, or the Eastern region. Andrew, hi there, good evening. Well, tell us what's happening in the East, as far as you can at the moment.
Well, we've just had that Castle Point result through as you join us. The East of England has always been seen as being a Eurosceptic area. We've got a very strong UKIP presence in this part of the world, particularly here in Essex. Of course, UKIP's only MP, Douglas Carswell, has his seat just down the road from here in Clacton, and 4 out of the 7 Euro MPs for the East of England have been in the Leave camp. So the expectation was that we'd always see quite a strong Leave vote here tonight, and indeed that's what we have been seeing. We had that result from Basildon a couple of hours ago now, 69% to Leave, Harlow 68%, Rochford 67%. They're counting Chelmsford behind me at the moment. At one stage, Remain thought there stood a good chance with Chelmsford. The expectation now is that Chelmsford could also go to Leave, and further afield I'm starting to hear stories coming out of places like Fenland, Great Yarmouth, Ipswich, that Leave could do very well there as well.
Thanks very much. Tim
It's 10
Donovan
o'clock.
is in Guildhall. Tim, good evening. London, is it hacking it as far as the Remain campaign is concerned? Is it pulling its weight?
6 results out of 33 expected tonight, and there is a pattern emerging. Big, hefty wins for the Remain camp in Lambeth, in Wandsworth, here in the city itself, in Hammersmith, in Islington, and Barkingham-Dagenham, though, has gone to Leave. We're trying to get our head round what we think will emerge as the significant factor here in London, which is the variations between in turnout. And while the Lambeth victory was 79% Remain to 21%, it was on a turnout of 67%, which is going to be lower than the turnout we're hearing elsewhere in parts of the country, albeit people are telling me, that is high for that part of the world. The key issue appears to be, from the turnout figures we're getting so far, is that at places like Richmond, 82% turnout. We're going to be getting that result shortly, we're told. Harrow in the 70s, Bexley in the 70s, Croydon similarly. The turnout is higher in that outer London area, and all the polling up to this referendum in London had suggested that gap between Remain and Leave in London narrows dramatically in outer London, and that appears to be very much where the secret or the answer in London will lie tonight.
And turnout affected at all by weather? When people early on this evening were saying that this monsoon rain that London's been suffering, and the flooding and all the rest of it, has brought the turnout down, and that would affect the raw numbers of Remain, because we keep on reminding people it's not who wins where, it's actually in the end the number of people who vote one way or t'other.
Depends who you talk to. The returning officer here was saying earlier that he expected the turnout across London to be 74%, 75%, which is very high by London standards. It got into the early 80s back in 1950. There was a certain amount of disruption first thing this morning, but only 7 polling stations out of those 3,700 there are in London were actually disrupted, and very briefly. And it's not automatically clear that the weather has made a difference. It may well be that actually people being delayed in London, as they were in Waterloo Station and whatever in the late this afternoon, that might have affected the turnout and the vote in in areas outside of London, but it's not being blamed at this
come
stage.
in, while you're talking, we've had Richmond upon Thames.
We have.
Come in 31% leave, 69% remain. Prosperous area, very high proportion of people, I'm told, with degrees. Apparently people with degrees tend to vote Remain. Do you agree with that rather snobbish view, Theresa Villas sitting here, that people with degrees vote Remain?
Well, I think that's
Do you have a degree?
I do have.
You do have a degree. Good for you.
I think that's what some of the pundits are saying. But,
do you believe it? I mean, do you believe this? It's almost a kind of class division that has been established, isn't it? In the minds of psephologists, people with degrees better off vote Remain.
Well, I was in no doubt that there's a strong support for Leave amongst the working classes. I think they have, in many ways, been at the sharp end of the depression of wages, which has come from mass migration from Europe. So they have felt directly some of the difficulties that come with our EU membership. And I think that's one of the reasons why many of them are voting.
Could Labour have done any better, do you think, to get them out for their side?
Well, I don't know, because the trouble was that in the renegotiation, Europe's leaders were fundamentally opposed to significant changes to free movement. And once that decision was made, it's difficult for people to convince those who are concerned about immigration that it's possible to get things changed.
Laura.
But I think, Theresa Villas, you sound slightly hesitant about endorsing that theory that people who don't have degrees or who are less educated were more on your side. But in fact, the Out campaign absolutely went for that narrative. You built a whole narrative on this idea of David versus Goliath, the elites versus the working class, the gilded cage of London versus the rest of the country. And it appears so far the pattern of results suggests that narrative really appealed to a lot of voters, and maybe they were onto something. They tried to make it a battle between the haves and the have-nots, and it appears still only halfway through the night. Are we halfway through the night yet? Maybe almost there. It appears that people are responding to that, and they didn't respond as strongly to the other side of the argument, which was trying to frighten the life out of people on the economy.
We're less than 1/3 through in terms of the count. You may feel it's halfway through the night because it's 3:05.
We're only just getting down to business, aren't we, really?
But of course, it also goes along with this contempt for, I mean, the thing Boris Johnson said, this contempt for experts.
Indeed. Michael Gove said people have had enough of experts.
We've had enough of the Governor of the Bank of England. We've had enough of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. We've had enough of the IMF. We've had enough of anybody who speaks. We've had enough of economists.
But a fascinating thing that Stephen Crabb said a short while ago, people don't believe us. He even used that phrase. He was talking about white working class voters, and he said in a general context, people don't believe us, which it strikes me that's rather an astonishing thing for a member of the cabinet to say.
And how do you redress it?
That's an extremely difficult challenge. And if we end up, whatever the result is, whichever side is jubilant, if we end up where basically London has sort of been an island and the rest of the country is pointing fingers at saying, you don't listen, you don't understand, for any government, for any political party, it's going to be very difficult to find a way forward from that.
Patrick Burns is back, our political editor for the Midlands in Birmingham. Welcome back, Patrick. What more news have you got now?
Well, I think interesting developments really in the sense that, all right, no great surprise that places like North Warwickshire, Tamworth, Cannock on the outer edge of the conurbation have voted emphatically to leave. I think that was expected. But Malvern Hills, that was much less, according to those algorithms we've been talking about all evening, much less likely to vote leave. It has done by a comfortable majority of 53% to 47%. I think that's the real anxiety for the Remain campaign. Add to that the Remain campaign is braced for really substantial defeats in and around the Black Country. And one example of what's bound to be interpreted as the relative failure, frankly, of Labour to bring out their Remain support in core areas. Look at Sandwell, which is, well, it's jokingly referred to as a one-party state, and yet the turnout there, just 66%, which I think demonstrates what will be seen as Labour's failure there. And I can tell you, UKIP are going to be saying over the next few days that they stand ready to do to Labour in their core areas in England what the SNP have done to Labour support in Scotland. I was talking to one quite prominent local Labour MP who says that on the immigration issue, Labour has to change tack. It has to say to people, yeah, we get it. We realise that you're very concerned about immigration, that it doesn't make you a racist to have these anxieties, and to change the tenor of this debate rather than try to sort of present it in more simple, more traditional party terms.
Well,
so I think that there's some big questions.
But if Britain votes out, they've got all the mechanisms they want because there'll be no automatic EU immigration. So presumably John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn will be able to do what they want.
Yes, I think there is a debate here for the Labour Party. I think we're just at the beginnings of this. Interestingly, that turnouts, again, do seem to be lower in the traditional core Labour areas. That's, again, a big worry for the party's leadership, it seems to me.
4,389,000 for Leave, 4,354,000 for Remain at the moment, and we have 122 out of 382 declared, so it is only a third of the way through. Emily.
Let's talk to the Conservative MP, Bill Cash. I suppose we might call you an early Eurosceptic, Bill Cash, and when you look at where we are tonight, a third of the votes in, but let's call it a high possibility that it could be a Brexit by the end of the night. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm watching it with enormous interest, and I'm being extremely cautious because at the moment things are going very steadily in the right direction. I actually believe this is about the common sense of the British people. They didn't buy the Armageddon arguments, and above all else they want to govern themselves, and that's really the basis. Even when I set up the Maastricht referendum campaign all those years ago, that's what I said it was going to be about European government and whether or not the British people wanted to govern themselves. And I actually think that is coming through at the moment. But I'm not going to make any predictions. I'm not a John Curtis. I'm just going to wait and see.
There's only one John Curtis, as we shout in the stalls. But in terms of what you think might happen in the event of a Brexit, do you think that David Cameron should stay on? Would you like him to trigger Article 50 straight away? What do you see as the next step?
Well, I certainly don't think that we should trigger Article 50 straight away. Actually, it ties us right into the question of the consent of the European Parliament to the deal. There's majority voting. It puts us at an enormous disadvantage. And by the way, because it's part of the Lisbon Treaty, if we've just voted against the treaties, then why would we want to implement one of the provisions which ties us down when actually we've got a better opportunity to be able to work out a negotiated deal on the basis of the vote which has actually led to a Brexit, if that's what happens?
You skirted past the first bit of that question. Do you think David Cameron should stay in the job? Did he sign the letter?
I simply say this, that it is incredibly difficult if you're in number 10 with all the government departments, each one of which reports to the Cabinet Secretary and, of course, obviously dealing with the Cabinet Office as well. As Chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee, I'm extremely conscious of the interaction between government departments and the European issue. And I can simply say this, it has to be done from within number 10, and therefore whoever is in number 10 would need to be absolutely and completely committed to Brexit, because this is going to be a very, very, very important and historic development for the United Kingdom.
It wouldn't be odd for you to reckon on a Brexit campaigner, a Tory leader.
Well, look, I'm not going to go down there because we don't know what the result is. I'm just simply giving you my view as Chairman of the European Scrutiny Committee and making the point that, as far as I'm concerned, the question of who runs the ultimate European policy has to be in number 10, and to do that and to negotiate with all the implications for European legislation right the way across the board of all government departments, they will actually have to unravel about 55% of all our laws, because those come from the European Union.
We've heard from the Labour side people throwing up different ideas as to why, particularly in the northeast, in Sunderland and Newcastle, it seems to be such a strong vote towards Brexit. Do you think this is purely about Europe, or do you concede it's about a whole host of other dissatisfactions in people's lives?
Well, I think they interact, and you only have to look across to Europe itself to see there are protests and riots going on there. There is massive unemployment, youth unemployment up at 60% and so on. But I think actually, really and truly, the bottom line is this business of people wanting to govern themselves. I mean, I was talking to a lady this morning in the greengrocer's shop, and I said, you know, what are you intending to do? And she said, very, very simply, she said, I want to leave. Why did they die in the last war? That is the kind of thing that's also motivating a lot of people. They want to know whether in fact they can govern themselves, and they ask themselves these much deeper questions than some of the things about whether or not there is a shallow recession, as the IFS puts it, or whatever. It's actually much deeper than that, and I think this is the soul of the British people coming out and saying, we have actually had enough of being governed by other countries. We want to cooperate with them, we want to trade with them, but we don't want to be governed by them. And I think there is a German question as well, because they're becoming increasingly dominant in Europe, and I think that's also a factor.
Okay, Sibel Cash, thank you very much.
So let's just see where things are. 3:15, John Curtis. Where are things?
Well, we've seen quite a lot of results during the course of the night, whereby it looks as though the Leave side have been doing rather well, and certainly rather better than we expected they would do in that local authority if we were looking at a 50-50 outcome. Now, conversely, we've also seen some places, most notably in London, where the Remain side have been doing rather better. But the truth is that so far, at least, we've had many more places where Leave are doing better than expected than where Remain are doing better than expected. Particularly the northeast, the northwest and the West Midlands are places where the Leave side really do seem to be doing rather remarkably well.